Hi folks, my name's Sam from Helpful Home DIY. Today I'm going to show you how to paint onto fresh plaster. So in my last video I showed you how to prepare the plaster ready for painting. That involved sanding a few bits here and there, just generally getting it as smooth as possible so that it gives a really neat finish. So when you're painting onto fresh plaster, you really want the paint to bond to the plaster. It's tempting just to go straight for, say, a really thick, gloopy base coat just to get that coverage that promises one coat will do. Trust me, that's never the case. The problem with the thick base coats is that they don't leach into the plaster and provide a really good bond. What they do is they sit on the surface, and then you are at risk of the paint peeling away from the plaster at a later date. So the first thing we need to do is paint the surface of the plaster with something that really leaches in. Best way to do that, and having spoken to quite a few decorators and obviously done my research online, is just to buy a box standard white emulsion paint. Just a cheapo will do, and mix that 1 part emulsion with 1 part water. You can apply that on, and what that will do is, because it's so watered down, yes, it doesn't give a very good finish in terms of getting it white straight away. You'll have to put 2, maybe 3 coats on. But what that does is, because it's so watered down, it really gets into the plaster and provides a good bond, ensuring that the paint doesn't peel off in the future. Right, so the first thing we need to do is obviously just get the sheets down and protect that floor. In my case, I'm going to put extra sheets down and cover absolutely everything, including the windows. The reason being is because it's going to be particularly messy for the first 2 coats of paint, where we're using 1 part water and 1 part emulsion, because I'm going to use this bit of kit. The Bosch PFS 3000-2, and it's a spray gun. It plugs in and it's brilliant. I use it on fences in my landscaping day job, and it's also got a setting for indoor paint. Of course, if you haven't got a spray gun, which not everyone has, then just use a box standard roller. That does the job. And obviously the first thing we need to do is protect the floor and everything else from paint. So the first thing we need to do is just get those sheets down. So another consideration is it's tempting to leave sockets like that if you're painting. In my case, I'm spray painting, so I've got to be extra careful. Now, you want to cover them up because just there is the thread for attaching the face of the socket. If I'm spray painting especially, even if you're rolling, you don't want to get paint in that because it's just going to get in the way. So just want to put just a bit of masking tape over that. Right, so I've got this pretty handy bucket that has measurements on the side of it, so I can get the quantities bang on right. I filled it with, I think, 2 litres of water. I'll put 2 litres of paint in. Obviously the thing you need to do, give the paint a good stir beforehand. Tip it in. With paint, always make sure that you give the rim a good clean, just the wipe, to avoid any paint drying on the rim. So after you close the lid, leave it for a few days, few months, whatever, you get paint drying on the rim. Then the next time you open it, once you pop that lid off and it makes that cracking sound, you get bits of dried paint falling in the pot, which is no good. So make sure you give the rim just a good wipe. Just around the outside. You don't need to go on the inside because that's not going to dry because the lid's on, obviously. Then once you've got the paint in with water, just give it a good stir to make sure it mixes up well. And then you're good to put it in the tray if you're using a roller, or if you're using a spray gun, put it in the spray gun. And then attach the top on. This holds up to 1 litre, by the way, and it has some pretty handy measurements on the side for telling you how much paint you've got. Just on the side there. Then you're good to go. Alright, so got this around my shoulder. I recommend you put it over your head so it doesn't pop off your shoulder. I've got the paint in, I'm good to go. You want to hold it about a foot away from the wall. It comes out pretty quick, but just keep going. When you start your spray, don't start on the wall and then go, because you'll get a big patch on the point that you started. Start aiming away from the wall and then go into it. You want to overlap the strokes. Also, I don't know if you can see, but I've started a bit here just to test. You want to overlap the strokes by sort of a couple of inches, just to make sure you get good coverage. It's pretty noisy, but I'll make sure the volume's turned down when I edit this video. Oh, and the other thing is, obviously I'm in a concealed room, so I want a dust mask, but I've got this, so it works pretty well, it's quite comfy. Okay, so that took about 15 minutes to paint the whole room. It went pretty well. So if you notice, I did actually have to rechange that bottom canister 7 or 8 times. I've used 3.5 litres. I reckon if I was rolling that, I don't know, it'd probably take an hour. So it's a pretty good coverage. In some places it looks a bit splattery, but on close inspection those are completely flat. So it is the first coat, so it's not going to be obviously completely even. So we'll see how it comes out on the second coat. One thing to consider is it creates a lot of draft. It pumps out a lot of air. Obviously it's a spray gun. So you really do need to tape down those sheets to make sure they don't get blown about. Also, what I showed you earlier was I put little bits of tape over the threads of the sockets. A couple of those got blown out, so it's really worth just wrapping that tape around that thread just to make sure it doesn't get blown away. The other thing to consider is everything in your room. Now, there's lots of paint particles flying around, and I've got my laptop open there, so that's probably a silly idea. So really just have nothing in the room, because it will get a light coating of paint. Similarly for doors, the hinges and things like that, just make sure that everything's covered. Because everything will get covered in paint. One thing you really got to watch out for, and this applies to using a spray gun and a roller, is very quickly the water and emulsion mix in the tub settles, so the emulsion mix sort of sinks or whatever, it doesn't stay completely mixed. So every time you top up your tray or the tub for the spray bottle, just make sure you give it a stir beforehand, and then that just makes sure that the mix is good every time you're topping it up. That will need to dry for about an hour or so until it's completely dry before putting on the second coat. In the meantime, I'm just going to give we'll put some cling film on the bucket so that paint doesn't dry, and just give the spray gun a wash. Best way to do that is obviously wash out the tub, fill it with water and just spray it out, and it's quite an easy way of cleaning it. You can also put white spirit in the tub and spray that out as well. Obviously watch where you're spraying it. And that just cleans the nozzle completely, and then it's just a little bit of a wipe and it's good, so it takes a couple of minutes. Okay, so it's about an hour and 20 minutes later, and I'm going to go for the second coat. Probably best covering all that stuff there this time around. It's completely dry, it's completely flat, there's no drips whatsoever, and I've had a good look around, so I'm really pleased with the results so far. Second coat will be the same again, 1 part water to 1 part emulsion. Okay, so that's the second coat on. You can see quite a transformation already actually. Just be tempted not to go all out and get a nice thick coat on straight away, because you just end up with runny bits. Where I sprayed in like over a socket, and there's a bit of paint build up inside the socket, and one location that sort of started to run down the wall, so I got a bit of a drip down the wall. Now, what I did is I held the spray gun without pressing the trigger, so air was still blowing out but with no paint. I just held it up against the drip and it smoothed out the drip nicely onto the wall. Just a helpful tip for you there. I am finding that putting the nozzle of the spray gun that way round so that it fans horizontally is best, and you can just bend your legs and go up the wall just like that. That's easiest. With regards to the corners, like I mentioned earlier, you want it diagonally like that. What that does is create the round shape to get in the corner. Works quite well. However, just be aware that if you put it like that, then you get a diagonal fan. So it has to be, in my case, or my case to the right, like that. Anyway. Okay, so it's been about an hour and 20 minutes and this is dried out nicely. So the 1-on-1 emulsion water mix is called a mist coat. Once those have dried, it's a really good time to inspect the walls. So with the white walls, it's a lot easier to see the lumps and bumps and scrapes and scratches compared to when it was just bare plaster. The white sort of shows that up really well. Have a good inspection. Now's the time to, again, sand out any more lumps and bumps that you might have, or if something needs filling up, use polyfiller or some other sort of filler just to smooth that off nicely. Leave the polyfiller whatever overnight and sand it down. So this is your final chance really to get rid of those lumps and bumps, because once you start putting the base coat on, it's going to be a lot more difficult to rectify. So if you've done this with the roller, now's the time to put your base coat on, which is a much thicker, usually white coat of paint before putting on the coloured coats. In this case, I'm going to put on a thicker coat using a water and emulsion mix, just because I've got the spray gun out ready and it's good to use it. It'll take me 10-15 minutes to do this room. Just to give you a bit of feedback on that Bosch spray gun, I'm incredibly impressed with the results. The walls are so smooth, there's not one drip mark anywhere. Where I thought there might be drip marks, so where I'd seen 1 or 2 bits run down, it's not been a problem at all, they're just flattened out nicely. I've also, if on one of my previous blog posts, I showed you how to sand off plaster work. So if you're DIY and you plastered the walls, it'll be a bit lumpy bumpy if you've not done it much before, but there's ways to sand that off to get it really smooth. Just to give you a bit of feedback on that, I'm incredibly impressed with the smoothness of the walls. The sanding did a really good job. It's well worth putting the time in for that. So if you're on the fence of whether to get a plasterer, obviously pay lots of money, or whether to have a go at plastering yourself, as long as you don't mind putting a bit of time in it and sanding afterwards, I'd say go for it. It's so easy to rectify bad plaster, and I'm really happy with the results. So I'm just going to get on making that mix, use a spray gun, I'm going to leave it overnight, and then we should be ready for the next coat of paint. Right, so after the third coat, just a couple of extra tips. So the third coat was about 25% water, 75% emulsion. It went on really well. It's a lot thicker than the last coat, obviously. And I think that's it for the spray gun for now. So the next coat will be a really thick base coat, which I'll apply with the roller. Now, going back to the spray gun. So, a couple of extra things. So that spray gun started to struggle a bit with the third coat because of the thickness of the paint. Now, I think I know why. Because taking it apart, there's a spray gun and there's a needle there. That needle, you screw that on, and then that needle just sort of pokes out there. Now, when I pull the trigger, hopefully that'll focus, it pulls the needle in, so it lets more airflow and therefore paint out of that nozzle. So that's a direct result of pulling the trigger. So what was happening with the thicker sort of paint is that it was getting trapped in between the needle, that gold bit, and the white sleeve that goes around the needle, so that when I let go of the trigger, it wasn't stopping the paint fully from coming out. So you still get the airflow coming around there, and it sucks the paint out, but because it wasn't closing properly because of the thick paint, and it's still sucking a bit of paint out. So if you do use a sort of slightly thicker mix than that, 1 part water to 1 part emulsion, just bear in mind that if you do let go of the trigger, it's still going to spray a little bit of paint out, so just watch where you're aiming it. So that's all in one day. I started the first coat at about 12:30, 1 o'clock-ish, with an hour in between the first and second coat, for about an hour and 20 minutes. Same again after the second coat, and then the same again after the third coat. So I got the third coat on, it was about 5:30. And it was all clean at about 6, so within the space of 5 hours I got 3 coats of paint on. Now, the the next coat won't dry so quick. Those first coats dry quick because it's straight onto plasterboard. So I'm going to leave this overnight. It's still a tiny bit tacky. We don't want to go putting the base coat, which is real thick stuff, straight onto this. We want to let this completely dry, otherwise we're going to have problems. So leave that overnight, definitely. And first thing in the morning, we'll put the base coat on. Okay, so that covers putting the base coat on. I've decided to split this video into two. So next week, I'll cover putting the next coats on, because that goes into a lot of detail, such as painting the corners and things like that. So I think it's worth just splitting this up into two videos instead of it being a 30-40 minute long epic. So thanks for watching. I hope you found that really useful. As always, I put a lot more detail on my blog post on my website. That's www.helpfulhomediy.co.uk. And if you just go to the top there and click on the how-to section on the menu, scroll down, you'll find the blog post on this, and there'll be a little bit more information there. If you found this useful, please subscribe and to my channel and like the video. And if you've got anything else to add, please add it in the comments section by all means. Then everyone else can benefit from what you put up there. And if you've got any questions, again, just put them in the comment section and I'll answer, or maybe someone else will answer. And we can all help each other out. That's the whole idea. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next Saturday. And in the meantime, good luck with painting your plaster. Just to give you a bit of feedback on that